Okay, Chapter 2 deals with chemistry. This is just going to be an overview of Biology 103, actually. It's just some basic information that you guys should have. If you haven't taken biology, so this will help you to maybe some of these concepts you're going to see in anatomy, and it's going to give you a basic understanding as to what it is that you need to know when it comes to certain concepts in anatomy. So biochemistry is Chapter 2. It's important for your professional careers. It's important that you have a background in chemistry in order to understand how the body actually works. Some important minerals in the body are calcium, phosphorus, chlorine, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and sulfur. They make up about 4% of our body weight. There are some carbon, oxygen, which are not on here. These are minerals. Carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium and phosphorus are up here. These are the ones that make up 98.5% of the body's weight. Once again, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus. Of course, calcium, is very important in your teeth. We're going to talk about calcium as it relates to it being stored in the bones in order to make them very, very dense. And we're going to also talk about calcium later in the semester when we talk about deal with muscle contraction. Electrolytes are pretty important as well. These are mineral salts. Some common electrolytes are magnesium, sodium chloride, nitric acid, calcium chloride, sodium hydroxide, phosphorus. Those are some common ones. Sometimes electrolytes, of course, are important when it comes to your heart and your brain. They actually send electrical currents from these particular organs, such as your heart, your brain, and your muscles. And of course, they send them from these organs to the surface of your skin. However, if you have an electrolyte imbalance, that can be an issue here because these electrolytes are found in body fluids. When you have an electrolyte imbalance, oftentimes when people that do is due to diarrhea, vomiting, dehydration can lead to an electrolyte imbalance as well, which can, of course, be fatal. You can go into a coma or perhaps cardiac arrest. Here are some tables of some of the major ones. I did mention some of them. Sodium bicarbonate is a big one. Sodium chloride is probably one of the most important ones. And they're showing you how they've divided them up into cations and anions. Cations, as you can see, typically has a positive charge behind that particular electrolyte or element. Anions have a negative charge behind that particular electrolyte or element. Acid, bases, and pH are very, very important as well when it comes to your understanding of chemistry or anatomy. Whenever you have an acid is a proton donor. It releases hydrogen ions in water. An example would be hydrochloric acid. Proton donor. The proton donor we're talking about over here is, of course, a hydrogen ion. Bases, on the other hand, they are proton acceptors, which means they're going to accept that hydrogen ion that's going to be released by that acid. Also, acids, they accept hydroxide ions or the OH group that you see in a base. And of course, bases, they're going to release the hydroxide ions, if that makes any sense. One is going to donate a hydrogen. The other one is going to donate an OH group. One is going to accept, the acid is going to accept the OH group, and the base is going to accept the hydrogen ion from the acid. A pH, of course, measures the molarity or the number of hydrogen ions in a solution. The pH scale runs from 1 to 14. A pH of 7, of course, is neutral. Whenever you have something neutral, there is a balance, one equal concentration of both hydrogen and hydroxide ions. Anything less than 7 on the pH scale is considered acidic. For example, in your textbook on page Page 52, they're showing you the pH scale, and they're showing you some common examples of what things are acidic as well as those things that are actually basic. The lowest on the pH scale, as you can see, hydrochloric acid is pretty low. Hydrochloric acid will lead to a 3rd degree burn if you spill it on yourself. Gastric juice is 0.9 to 3.0. The gastric fluids in our stomach has a very and extremely low pH for the mere fact any of the foods that gets into our stomach has to be broken down by this gastric acid or fluid in order for it to be absorbed into our small intestines, which of course it leaves the stomach and travels to our small intestine. So anything less than 7 is acidic. You're going to have more hydrogen ions. That's why you have hydrogen is greater than the OH group. A base, on the other hand, you're going to have is greater than 7. 7 to 14 or 8 to 14 on the pH scale is a base. You're going to have more OH groups than hydrogen ions. Oftentimes people get acid reflux because the gastric fluid in our stomachs is so low. That's a very, very low pH, which means there are going to be a lot of hydrogen ions circulating in our stomachs. So on the other hand, when people have the acid reflux, because they're eating acidic foods such as lemons, oranges, tomatoes, limes, tomato sauce, grapefruits, grapefruit juice, that can cause too many excess hydrogen ions in the stomach region, which is why they need a base such as the Rolaids, the Toms, anything that's going to relieve the symptoms of the acid reflux, because when you take that base, it's going to override or absorb. Remember, it's going to accept all of those excess hydrogen ions, and it's going to bring the pH back to where it needs to be in your fluids. So, in other words, your stomach will become neutral because you're going to have a balance. Once again, you're going to have that balance of the H plus and the OH ions in the stomach. Now, there's going to be a tenfold change on the pH scale going from 1 to 14. 1 to 2 is a tenfold change. 2 to 3 is a tenfold change. 4 to 5 is a tenfold change, all the way up to 14. You kind of get the picture. If you go from 4 to 6 on the pH scale, there's going to be a 100-time fold change there. The lower the number is on the pH scale, the more hydrogen ions are going to be presented, and the more acidic that particular solution will be. However, we do have buffers to counteract, as I stated, an excess of hydrogen ions as well as OH ions. So they resist changes in pH. pH of our blood, of course, we're about to talk about bicarbonate, which is a buffer that's responsible for maintaining the pH of our blood, which is crucial for physiological functions. So this right here, the pH of our blood typically range between 7.35 to 7.45. Anything above or below that can actually be fatal. You can get muscle cramps, well, not muscle cramps, but you can go into a coma or cardiac arrest. Muscle cramps is not fatal. So typically when it's 7.35, you go into a state called what you call acidosis. If it's 7.45, you go into the state called alkalosis. So bicarbonate is responsible for regulating those changes that can actually take place with the pH of our blood. Metabolism, all the chemical reactions in the body. So we're about to talk about the macromolecules, how we break down those foods that we consume, such as your carbohydrates, your lipids, and your proteins, and at the same time, how we're going to take those large molecules or smaller molecules to make the macromolecules in order to feed our cells. So catabolism, on the other hand, energy is going to be released. Okay, so what you're going to do, you're going to take that large molecule, which is your carbohydrate, and you're going to break it down to a smaller molecule, also known as a monomer, which would be your monosaccharides, simple sugar, or glucose. And With anabolism, you're going to need energy. So you're going to have an input of energy over here. So in order for catabolism takes place in us, okay? I don't know if you guys are familiar with cellular respiration, but cellular respiration is an energy releasing process. So in order for us to expend energy, we typically take the macromolecules that we consume in the foods that we eat and break them down into the smaller molecules where they're subunits in order for us to have energy to get through our everyday activities. Anabolism, on the other hand, energy is going to be stored, so there's going to be an input of energy required over here. So it's going to be the opposite, okay? So you're going to take the smaller molecules and you're going to produce the large ones, okay? With catabolism, you're producing the smaller ones from the larger ones. With anabolism, you're producing the larger ones from the smaller ones. So in order to produce a carbohydrate or a large molecule, you're going to have the glucose, the monosaccharide, or the simple sugar. These two are inseparably, they work hand in hand, and they are correlated or highly related to the chemical reactions that occur in our body, which is metabolism. Okay, here are some more things you guys need to understand, explain how enzymes function, blah, blah. We're going to talk about organic compounds over here. So once again, this is a review for you guys. So it's going to be very, very short and very brief. Okay, here are your macromolecules. They're also called organic compounds. They're also called organic molecules. Carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and your nucleic acids are considered macromolecules. They're very large organic molecules. They're also referred to as your polymers, okay? Macromolecules made of a repetitive series of identical or similar subunits, which are your monomers. So let's take, for example, we're going to look in our textbook. If you will follow me to page 57 of your textbook, well, all of this starts on page 56 and it goes to the end of the chapter. So in order to make, let's say, for example, we're trying to make starch. You're going to see as in your reading that starch is considered a polysaccharide. A polysaccharide simply means, poly means many. There are many, many subunits of glucose monomers, 3,000 to be exact, that's going to make starch. So macromolecules, your macromolecule or your polymer is going to be your starch, okay? So in order to make this starch, you're going to have monomers in the form of glucose to make it. Really good example. It's called polymerization, okay? So I put the example here. We're going to make a protein, which is one of your macromolecules or polymers. So you're going to have several amino acids in order to do that. Amino acid 1, amino acid 2, amino acid 3, whatever. But you're going to have amino acids here in order to make what? A protein, okay? Joining monomers to form a what? A polymer. So let's look at, once again, another really good example. Sucrose. Okay. In your textbook, some monosaccharides for glucose, galactose, and fructose, okay? Disaccharides, sucrose, lactose, maltose. Now, sucrose, on the other hand, although it's only a disaccharide, but it's larger than a monosaccharide, which makes it a macromolecule or a polymer. So how are we going to make this sucrose? Okay, you're going to take two monomers. You're going to take what? What are you going to take? Ask yourself that question. Glucose and fructose, a monomer 1, monomer 2, in order to create what? Sucrose, which is your disaccharide in this case. You go back to hydrolysis. Hydrolysis means to split a water molecule. This is how we digest our food. It's the opposite of dehydration synthesis. Here, instead of removing water, you're going to have to add water, okay? So we're going to add an OH group to glucose. We're going to add an H to the fructose, which are our two monomers, okay? And of course, if we go over here, okay, here we go. So now you can see that the dimer now is on your left side. So sucrose is about to be broken down. So in order for that to happen, okay, you're going to have to add the H to your glucose, which is monomer 1, the OH, which is fructose, which is monomer 2, creating what you call water. So you're going to split that sucrose, which is your polymer, and you're going to have to add water in order for it to be broken down to your monomers. So in order for us to break down these polysaccharides, those macrobes, lipids, proteins, okay, we need water in order to digest our food or break these molecules down. Carbohydrates, they're hydrophilic, which means they love water. Most of them are sugars, which means sugars we know can dissolve in water. They have a 1-to-1 ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygens. Most of your carbohydrates, of course, end in OSE. Saccharin, monosaccharide, disaccharin, polysaccharide, or polysaccharin, whatever you want to call it, okay, means sweet. Here are some examples of simple sugars or sugars that have one unit: glucose, galactose, and fructose. As you can see, glucose and galactose have 6 carbons because they have 6 sides. It's a ring structure, 6-carbon sugar. Fructose, of course, is a 5-carbon sugar because it only has 5 sides. Disaccharides, on the other hand, sugar made of 2 monosaccharides with 3 important disaccharides: sucrose, lactose, and maltose. Okay, sucrose is table sugar. Lactose is, you can see how they're taking those monomers. Remember, glucose and fructose are monomers. They're monosaccharides in order to make sucrose, which is going to be your polymer or disaccharide. Lactose, which is found in milk. Glucose and galactose, which are your monosaccharides for your monomers, will make the lactose, which is found in milk. Maltose, found in grain products, cereal bars, cereals, bread, things of that sort. You're going to take those 2 monosaccharides or 2 monomers, glucose in order to make the disaccharide or the polymer of maltose. So here are the polysaccharides. Okay, now this one right here is pretty important. You have glycogen, you've got starch, and you have cellulose. Okay. Glycogen is the energy storage in animals. Make sure you know that. We store glycogen, okay? We store it in our liver, our muscles, brain, uterus, vagina, okay? However, when we have too much glucose circulating in the blood, okay, it's going to be converted to glycogen, and it's going to be stored. And however, in between meals, when you start feeling hungry, well, you know, you haven't eaten, of course, the liver produces glycogen after a meal, and when your blood glucose level is high, and it breaks it down between meals to maintain your blood glucose level. So you don't want your blood glucose level to be really high, so glycogen has to be broken down between meals in order to stabilize it. Starch is the sugar storage found in plants. When plants are not making their own foods or their sugars or carbohydrates or whatever you want to call them, by a process called photosynthesis, they can store that excess sugar or polysaccharide starch, which gets them through the night and which can also help them to survive and get through the winter months. Cellulose is a polysaccharide considered in us. It's very difficult to digest. However, it is a part of the human diet. It's considered fiber. We get it in our roughage, but it's very, very difficult to digest. It's one of the most abundant compounds on earth because it's a part of our diet. And of course, as stated before, that's fiber. Although it's difficult to digest, it's our roughage. It has some benefits to it because it keeps you regular. When you consume enough of it, it keeps you full. Some people like to eat a lot of fiber if they're trying to lose weight because when you drink the water with it, it's going to swell in your stomach or in your digestive tract. And lipids. Lipids are considered hydrophobic, which means they don't dissolve in water. We know we just looked at carbohydrates as being hydrophilic because they love water and they will dissolve in water. These have a high ratio of hydrogen. They're called nonpolar hydrocarbons, lipids are, and there are five primary types you need to be familiar with. You have your fatty acids, your triglycerides, your phospholipids, your eicosanoids, and your steroids. These are very, very important. These five primary types, they give us energy, which is important. Carbohydrates, of course, give us energy, along with our lipids as well. So this is what the carbon-hydrogen ratio looks like in a lipid. This is palmitic acid, which is a saturated fat. These right here have a lot of hydrogens actually linked to a carbon chain. So when you have a saturated fats, you need to know the difference between a saturated fat and an unsaturated fat. Saturated fats, of course, they only have single bonds between the carbons, as you can see. In your textbook, page 60, okay? Unsaturated fatty acids, on the other hand, they're going to have double bonds between the carbons. They're going to have like a kink. Well, if you look, unsaturated, letter B, page 60, you can actually see two double bonds between carbons. Unsaturated fatty acids, they contain some double bonds between carbons in a chain. Polyunsaturated, you probably heard of the term polyunsaturated. Poly means they have several double bonds. We do have essential fatty acids that we must maintain, must be obtained from the foods that we consume. Those are not made in the body. A couple of essential fatty acids which are very important are omega-3s and omega-6 because we can't synthesize those acids in our bodies. Palmitic acid, of course, is considered saturated. Now, this one is found in both plants and animals. An example of this would be like peanut butter, margarine. It's the tuna, the oil that you find in tuna in the can. The tuna in oil is palmitic acid, which is saturated. Coconut oil, which is a plant-based oil, is considered a palmitic acid as well. Triglycerides. Now, stearic acid you have listed there. Linoleic acid, of course, is found in nuts and seeds. Stearic acids, which is saturated, is found in hair care products, soaps, and, of course, lotions. Triglycerides are considered your neutral fats. We store triglycerides as the most common fat in the body because it's stored in our fat cells. We're going to talk about adipocytes, which are fat cells that's found in the adipose tissue, which is where we tend to store our triglycerides. It's going to be released as energy between meals, kind of like your carbohydrates, where the glycogen gets broken down to glucose. However, when you have high levels of triglycerides, because it's found in a lot of the foods that we eat, it can actually lead to heart attack or a stroke. And these are also considered your trans fats. Make sure you read Clinical Insight or Clinical Application, Trans Fats and Cardiovascular Health. Put a question or two from Deeper Insight on trans fat and cardiovascular health, which is on page 61. In 2015, they discontinued the trans fats or hydrogenated fats. Meat dairy products. If you look at the trans fatty acid, letter A on page 61, that particular type of fat is found in meat and dairy products, and it remains in your circulation longer, which can cause the cardiovascular diseases or the heart attacks. You look at letter B, the oleic acid. This one right here has a double bond, which is, well, the kink, it's going to form a kink in the tails. So this one right here is going to be an oil. That's why it's called oleic acid. It's an oil due to the kink in the actual tail. Triglycerides that are liquid at room temperature are also called oils. Okay, now those that are liquids at room temperature, those are your polyunsaturated fats. Remember I told you, we just saw in the previous slides, polyunsaturated fats as well as saturated fats. Polyunsaturated fats, on the other hand, they come from plants, and these are better for you. They're liquids at room temperature. They have double bonds in them. So things such as sunflower oil, peanut oil, canola oil, things like that, safflower oil, those are considered polyunsaturated fats from plants. Anything that's plant-based is good for you. However, when it turns into a solid at room temperature, those are your saturated fats that actually come from your animals, such as the pigs, or if you like steak or hamburgers, the cows. Saturated fats, they will turn to a solid very, very quickly. So, when solid is called a fat, primary function, energy storage, also help with insulation and shock absorption. Certain organs in the body, such as your kidneys, have fat around them. There's a little bit around the heart as well to actually protect certain organs from damage or getting punctured. So in your textbook, triglycerides that are liquid at room temperature are called oils, but the difference between a fat and an oil is fairly arbitrary. Coconut oil, for example. Now, coconut oil, although it comes from a plant, is a solid at room temperature. Animal fats are usually made of saturated fatty acids, so they are called saturated fats. They're solid at room temperature or body temperature. Most plant triglycerides are polyunsaturated fats, which generally remain liquid at room temperature. Peanut, olive, corn, linseed oil, saturated fats contribute more to cardiovascular disease than unsaturated fats. And for this reason, it is healthier to cook with vegetable oils than with lard, bacon fat, or butter. Okay, not this one. Okay, you can see the hydrophilic region at the top, which is your head, which makes it amphipathic. So the bottom part, your tail, the fatty acid tail, is hydrophobic. So when you immerse a phospholipid in water, the tails are going to actually face each other. The hydrophilic heads, because they love water, they're going to face the aqueous solution or the water. So that's why they're considered amphipathic, because, or amphipathic, they're called amphiphilics as well, which is what I like to use. They're polar. They have both a polar and a non-polar end, a hydrophilic end and a hydrophobic end. Okay, icosanoids right here. These are found in. These are considered prostaglandins, hormone-like chemical signals between cells. 20 carbon compounds derived from a fatty acid called arachidonic acid. 20 carbon compounds. Examples: prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are very, very important. They have a number of roles, okay? They have a role in inflammation, clotting of the blood, hormone action, labor contractions. They produce those labor contractions. If prostaglandins are lacking, When someone is starting to have labor contractions, it's just going to prolong those contractions. Actually, prostaglandins, they relax smooth muscles in the bladder, the intestines, the bronchiole, uterus stimulate. Um, they stimulate the contraction of smooth muscles and blood vessels. They're going to control the diameter of the blood vessel, keep it from overly dilating or overly constricting. And then you have your steroids. Cholesterol is the parent steroid from which other steroids are synthesized, which is very, very important. Steroids, of course, cholesterol is found in the cell membrane. 15% of our cholesterol comes from our diet. 85%, which is a bulk, a large number, is actually produced or synthesized in the liver or produced by the liver. There are others, as you can see, hormones, progesterone, estrogens, testosterone. You have your bile salts as well, and you have cortisol, which are important lipids as well. So you have good and bad cholesterol. Make sure you read that on page 63. I may put a question about the good and bad cholesterol. There is only one kind of cholesterol that can do more good and harm. Good and bad cholesterol, the lipoproteins, which means you're going to have a combination of cholesterol, fat, phospholipids, and protein. HDL, the high density lipoproteins, they're the good cholesterol because they're going to have a lower amount of lipids compared to protein. And these are the ones you want your HDL to be at a certain level because you're not at risk for cardiovascular disease or having a heart attack or a stroke. LDL, on the other hand, these are your bad ones. That's when you're going to have a lot of lipids floating around in your blood that can actually cause the cardiovascular disease, the heart attacks, and the strokes as well. So you have your HDL, which is, I call the happy cholesterol. You have the LDL, which is what I call the lousy cholesterol. So I'm going to end this because I don't want to go over 30 minutes, and then I'm going to start a part 2 of this lecture. So here we go. I'm just going to end it here, and I'm going to create another section for you because I don't want you to spend, I don't want them to be too long and you get bored.